Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to another week of the Fixate and Binge podcast. I'm your host. As always, every single week of the year, I'm Joe. I'm glad you're with us. I hope you've had a great April. We're now moving into May. We're starting, if you're a parent and you have kids in public school, we're starting to get towards that phase where the kids are going to be lounging around the house quite a lot. And maybe you're going to come back to this podcast to look for recommendations of things that your kids can stream or watch that are recommended for young adults or kids. I'm planning on putting something together in the very near future, before the end of the month, that will give you parents or listeners or those of you with kids or nephews or cousins who will be spending the summer home. Obviously, I don't want to dump enough content so that the kids have no incentive to ever leave the house and spend the entire summer stuck indoors running up your electricity bill. But I can make some recommendations, and I'll put something together very soon, shortly. Heck, I'm trying to put something shortly together for myself as well. I remember a couple years ago assigning my kids for a spring break to watch all the extended cuts of Lord of the Rings. And I was surprised that they actually did do it. And it was almost a bonding experience for my three kids. My oldest is 10 years older than my youngest, and so there's almost a generational divide. There's certainly different phases of maturity and entertainment enjoyment and expectations, and yet all three of them found things they really enjoyed. So if your kids are capable of sitting down together and maybe watching a show together, and that helps kill a couple hours of time that they otherwise might be spending that time arguing, fighting, or stealing your jewelry and hawking it at the pawn shop, and buying drugs and then going to Vegas and spending it on hookers. I'm not sure if you have those kinds of kids, but hopefully my recommendations can help reduce those types of temptations in the home. So I'll come up with something. I'm really just glad to be able to talk to you. I've had so many guests on consecutive episodes. Last week's guest was fantastic, a man named Doug Prey, who directed a documentary called Louder Than Guns. And he did this with the leading musician, the leading voice, Ketch Secor, who fronts the band Old Crow Medicine Show, which is a very popular Grammy Award-winning bluegrass band, and they go all over the country. And this was an opportunity for them throughout their North American tour for them to stop at some of their tour stops and have conversations with regular Americans for or against the Second Amendment, well, I assume everyone's against gun violence in this country. I think we all have different opinions about how we get there. But this was not a documentary about arguing and fighting. This was trying to show normal, average Americans that it is possible to find common ground. It is possible to come together on a very polarizing topic and to actually be heard and to listen and to find this common ground, which seems increasingly impossible because our media wants us on two sides of the same fence, on different sides, as it were. So that is a fantastic episode. Again, the documentary is called Louder Than Guns. This past weekend, it had its premiere in New York City. Look for it. It will be rolling out. If you see it available to stream, it is the type of documentary they should be showing in schools. High schoolers should be sitting down to watch this. I'm not kidding. It's that good. It's the best thing about the Second Amendment and gun violence since Bowling for Columbine. I think that's high praise. I watched it. I got to meet with the director. That was last week's episode. If you're passionate about the Second Amendment, passionate about gun violence, want to see an example or some hope that things might change and move into a better direction, I urge you to, after listening to this podcast, go back and listen to the previous one, the previous episode. Again, that documentary is Louder Than Guns, and it was my privilege to meet with Doug Prey to discuss his process and his experience making that. So, yeah, highly charged. Now, today's episode, it's not as socially serious, today's show, but it does have like a tone to it. I think you probably surmised that by looking at the title of the episode. What I'm trying to do is I'm interested in a few things. First of all, I just completed the very excellent, I don't think I've ever talked about it, but the very excellent and very well done single series. I think they're going to come back for another series. They have to, of Disney's Darth Maul, or Maul, the Shadow Lord, right? It is exquisite, very good writing, excellent animation, bringing up a lot of interesting themes, and it's really. I also finished another show on Disney Plus, season 2 of Daredevil: Born Again. So the reason why I'm mentioning those two shows, because I recently finished them, is because there's some themes going on in those shows that dovetail into the topic I want to talk to you about today. First of all, let's talk about some current events, some things that are going on, and I'll try in my weird way to blend that into today's topic. What a time to be alive! We have a president who many people feel is the equivalent of Jesus Christ himself. And that's a little bit concerning. And I want to draw your attention to just the last couple months. It's the last 6 weeks. What's happened in the last 6 weeks? First of all, Trump has surrounded himself with people that should give everyone pause, should give every one of us some kind of worry. Listen to his spiritual advisor, Paula White, which is a very aptly named spiritual advisor for Donald Trump's White House. On April 1st of this year, in front of evangelicals at the White House, she had this to say. Let's go ahead and listen to it.
Great transformation requires great sacrifice. And Mr. President, no one has paid the price like you have paid the price. It almost cost you your life. You were betrayed and arrested and falsely accused. It's a familiar pattern that our Lord and Savior showed us. But it didn't end there for him, and it didn't end there for you. God always had a plan. On the third day, he rose, he defeated evil, he conquered death, hell, and the grave. And because he rose, we all know that we can rise. And sir, because of his resurrection, you rose up. Because he was victorious, you were victorious. And I believe that the Lord said to tell you this. Because of his victory, you will be victorious in all you put your hand to.
Wow. What a thing to say. I mean, I've heard of praise and then that, but comparing the President of the United States to the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and by the way, this is not a deeply religious Sunday school type podcast. Okay, this is, I try to keep, I don't have any skin in the game. I'm not trying to endorse one Judeo-Christian ideology over another. This is not a pro this or an anti that. But for those of you who do claim Christianity as your faith, this is not in any way meant to degrade or insult what you believe or what you hold dear. Not at all. But if you're being compared to the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, what might that do to your ego? What might that do to you if you're surrounded by people who believe you have a divine mandate? You are divinely led. I mean, English royal history is replete with examples of what happens when you have monarchs, kings, queens, who are obsessed with their divine mandate to do whatever they want and to break whatever law they need to, and say that they do so in the name of God himself. So it's a bit concerning, but if you surround yourself with people who tell you that you have attributes and character traits like the Messiah himself, what might that lead you to? Well, I have a feeling that it's not been good for Trump, because 11 days after that April 1st accolade by his spiritual advisor before the Easter weekend, in a Truth Social post, Trump posted an AI meme of himself as Jesus Christ, complete with a robe and healing the sick with glowing orbs in his hands and everything else, right? And there was some backlash for that, mostly from evangelicals. Now, we know that anything Trump posts is going to be roundly mocked by the left, by those who aren't his supporters anyway, but he took flack from his own side, still is taking flack. And so Trump offered up a flimsy excuse and then removed the Truth Social post. But as we know, the internet is forever. Nobody forgets anything. He's posting memes of himself as Jesus Christ. Now, earlier in the year, he posted a goofy meme of himself as the new pope. And people just were like, funny, inappropriate, not in good taste, whatever. That's Trump. That's our Trump. But now he's posting images of himself as Jesus Christ 11 days after he was compared publicly by his spiritual advisor to Jesus Christ himself. All right. Now let's fast forward until just 3 days ago. So 24 days after that meme of himself on his Truth Social post, Truth Social account of himself as Jesus Christ, 24 days later, which would be 3 days from the day of this recording, so May 6th, a large 20-foot statue of Trump coated in 24-karat gold was unveiled by evangelicals at Trump's own luxury golf course outside of Miami, Florida. Do we see a pattern here? Do you see, are you connecting some of these dots? In the last 6 weeks, he's been compared to Jesus Christ. He's posted pictures of himself as Jesus Christ. And now he's got graven images of himself erected for his glory, for himself. And so this literally looks like it violates the first and second commandments of the 10 commandments. And the first commandment being, of course, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And the second commandment, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. So draw from that what you will. But I will say this, for the people who support him, and I have family that do, they are willing to make whatever concession, whatever excuse, whatever they need to do. They're willing to rationalize it as long as it gets them what they want. And if Trump is the person that's delivering to them their stated goals, their political goals, their political vision for the country, then they're willing to overlook a multitude of sins. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about a little bit, because how did we get here as a nation? How did we get here where we could literally look at something that is objectively bad, objectively evil, if you want to use those terms, and go, well, I'm not so sure. Well, hang on a minute. You're taking it out of context. You know, how did we get there? I don't think anyone woke up and decided to become that person, to become that type, to adopt that type of thinking. So in a chicken before the egg theory, I wanted to propose that I actually think generally, when you look at art and you look at media, and sometimes it's the other way around, art imitates life, but sometimes life imitates art. And I think, just go with me on this, I think, as I was discussing earlier, some morally gray characters in, of course, Darth Maul, Shadow Lord. I think if you go back even further, we can see characters throughout television history that have certainly blurred the lines between morality. And it's been a weird phenomenon because my parents' generation grew up watching television shows that celebrated, good triumphing over evil. We call that poetic justice. Grew up on, Bonanza and Rawhide. Grew up on Westerns like Shane and High Noon, in which the good man does the right thing. And what's happening now is I don't think these characters no longer inspire today's generation. They're certainly less interesting. I think where we're headed culturally in America is we've been looking for characters that have flaws, that are not these paragons of virtue. We've been looking for characters that are a lot like us, that have everyman qualities. And in many cases, we're even looking for characters that would do things that we would never do, but we secretly wish we had the same guts to do. If you want to go back, I think this began with Tony Soprano in The Sopranos. You have a great charismatic character, but he is objectively evil. He's a mob boss. He kills people that gets in his way. He generally kills people that have it coming, who are also involved in organized crime. But if you watch all seasons of the show, there are some innocent bystanders that get killed as well. And yet we root for him. And why? Because the show did something brilliant and unprecedented. It humanized him. It humanized him because it showed the complex side of his personal life. He's a father, he's a husband, and he gets therapy. He has a therapist. And that's what made the character so fascinating. He wasn't a one-dimensional, evil, kind of snively whiplash, dastardly villain twirling his little mustache type. He wasn't that type of a villain. He actually had feelings like we all do. And he was humanized for us. And because he was humanized for us, I think as a viewer, we start to understand some of his impulses. We're not saying that we would do exactly what he would do. We would all, aspire to be mob bosses and bump off and kill enemies and rivals. But there are certain elements of Tony Soprano that we as viewers, especially if you're a father or a husband yourself or a business owner, there are certain elements of that character that we can understand. The first time I experienced this, where I watched a television character that I immediately identified with, and as the seasons went on, that character turned into something I couldn't recognize anymore, was Walter White of Breaking Bad. I first started watching Breaking Bad when it first came out, and I was not in a good place in my career. I had just, let's put my cards on the table, I had just failed to receive my PhD. I had defended my PhD thesis against an internal and an external examiner back in England. My external examiner teaches at Oxford University in England. So I'm not trying to brag, because bragging would be that I aced my PhD defense and now I'm doctor, but I'm not. She did not pass my PhD thesis, notwithstanding I wrote an over 200-page thesis. I don't have a doctorate because I didn't pass that PhD thesis. And it changed my life, maybe for the better. There's certainly some good things that have come from that, and I won't get into that because that's far too personal. But for better or worse, I put myself through grad school overseas, and I raised my family, most of them in England, and then returned without a PhD. And it was incredibly embarrassing and humbling. The type of humility I think I've had to have, which was good for me in some ways, for my spiritual and mental development, but it's also been hurtful. So I'm in, I came back. It's the economy's in the toilet. It's 2011, 2010. This new show is on AMC. It's called Breaking Bad, and it's about this really brilliant man in this kind of normal middle class home, lower middle class. He's raising a family, and he's a high school teacher, and he's brilliant. He's brilliant, but his career didn't come together the way he wanted. His dreams didn't come true the way he wanted. And so I instantly identified with his desperateness. And so when he's given his terminal diagnosis of cancer, and then he begins to realize that he has not been able to provide for his family, and the rationalizations he goes through. I mean, I understood that. I understood his frustration, and I understood immediately. I identified with his feelings of disappointment, the way his career, his professional career had gone. And so those types of insecurities I instantly identified with. But then the character became something, hence the title of the show. He broke bad. He became something else. He became Heisenberg, he became ruthless. He became cunning. He became all these things. I'm not saying that it was like a switch, but those things were always within his psyche, deeply embedded into his psyche. And I think each of us have the same impulses deeply embedded into our psyche. And for whatever reason that we can rationalize, whether it's circumstance or the unpredictable universe and the way it twists and bends, and suddenly we're put into situations making decisions we never could have imagined having to make. Like, I'm dying of stage 4 cancer. What am I going to do? What's my legacy? How's my family going to survive without me? We start making these rationalizations, and that's exactly what Walter White did. And as the seasons went on, I was less and less connected with him. And I hope I hope most of you felt the same way, but I'll admit there still was a very small part of me that wanted him to get away with it, that wanted him to pull it off, even though I saw him doing terrible, evil things. I didn't exactly feel that way about Tony Soprano. Maybe that's because I just didn't personally connect with him, the character, but I certainly felt that way about Walter White. And when his wife, Skylar, when that actress was getting hate mail, I kind of understood it. She was the one that was stopping him from doing the things he wanted to do and getting away with the things he wanted to get away with. We kind of wanted Walter White to successfully live this double life and be successful. And yet he was doing truly awful, evil things. And yet that actress, I can't remember her name, not Anna Gasteyer, that's Saturday Night Live. Anna Gunn, excuse me, I was close, same initials. Anna Gunn, the actress that played Skylar White, she was getting death threats, hate mail, because her character was really the only character that was opposing Bryan Cranston's Walter White. And yet she received hate for that. And that should tell you, I think, that the tone, the mood of a lot of viewers has shifted. We're not as much interested or fascinated by cookie cutter good and bad guys. We're really not. We are attracted to characters who make out of character judgment calls. Characters who one day are mild-mannered and the next minute road raging on the way home from work. Those are characters that we identify with and understand. These are characters that even some people can rationalize. Yeah, they do evil things, but technically speaking, we could make an argument that the ends justify the means, right? I mean, I'm spitballing here, but go with me on this. Do you remember after the Avengers films, Endgame and Infinity War, do you remember, have you ever come across the meme, Thanos was right? I mean, let that sink in for a little bit. There are whole internet pages devoted from philosophical sociologists or whatever, devoted to explaining there's an argument to be made that Thanos was right. Snapping his fingers and removing the universe of half of its living organisms was good for the universe. I mean, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. It's disturbing. And yet many people embrace it, so much so that it's gone viral. Thanos was right. That's terrifying. But that's the times we live in now. It's really weird how we are willing to overlook character flaws if the ends justify the means. I mean, if we feel that what we ultimately may get in the bargain, we're willing to overlook how we get there as long as we get what we want. And I feel that way politically. I know I've castigated conservative right-wing Trump supporters, but you know what? I see the left do it too. I saw the left do it during when Clinton was president. I'm not being stupid here. You'll see it too. So it's not like it's just exclusive to one party or another. Right now, it looks like it's one party because one party is in power and remains in power, largely because of this support base that is very cultish. But I think that the culture itself, long before Trump entered politics, was moving in this way, was moving into this way of there are some morally ambiguous gray areas we are willing to overlook if the ends justify the means. We were seeing characters on TV that were being embraced like this. And so I'm thinking of Ray, the character Ray. He doesn't have a last name, but Ray in the Fox TV show, which I love and I've gone on and on and on about before, Mr. In Between. He's a hired gun. He's a hitman, but he's also a single father. And he's got an ailing brother and a father, an ailing father and an ailing brother. And he is, as ruthless as he can be in his professional life, he also has this very human single dad part of him. And it's hard not to root for that character, even though what he is doing is objectively evil. Same thing with Dexter. I think Dexter, the TV show, Dexter Morgan plays a forensics guy who's actually, he moonlights as a forensic guy, but he's really a serial killer, except we feel that the ends justify the means because he targets other serial killers that evade justice. And so he brutally kills other people. And there are a few things throughout the course of that show that he does that are objectively evil, but we can look at it as viewers and still root for him because he's in waste management, which is the mob way of saying he takes out the trash. He takes out the dregs of society. He's doing society a favor. I feel that way whenever I hear, I mean, there was a band, I didn't listen to them, but I'm aware of them. They were called Lost Prophets, and the lead singer was Ian Watkins, and he was in jail for molesting children in England. And earlier this year, he got his throat slashed, and he bled out and died. And I got to tell you, that's murder, that's evil, but I don't feel any sympathy for him any more than I felt sympathy for Jeffrey Dahmer getting his head cratered in prison by a fellow inmate. That's justice. I mean, there's a part of me that I feel that way. I'm like, you know what? Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. You have it coming. There's also a sense that the justice system in this country doesn't always deliver the results that we, the people, want. That wealth can buy. You can buy yourself out of prison. You can buy yourself out of consequences. And so sometimes when we see justice being served, sometimes very brutally, outside of the bounds of the law, it's fascinating to us, right? It's fascinating. Now, as I watched Maul, the Shadow Lord, or Darth Maul, it's interesting. The character is evil. He's a Sith Lord, or was, and he's evil, and he's up to no good, and he's surrounded by terrible people. But he's also being pursued by other terrible people. He's castigated from the Empire. He's got inquisitors, and even Darth Vader himself, that's kind of a spoiler, showing up to try and take him out. And then Maul starts working side by side with some scattered Jedi. And I got to tell you, I was rooting for him. And yet I'm going, but you killed Qui-Gon Jinn in The Phantom Menace. I hate you. And even though Ewan McGregor, Obi-Wan, eviscerated you, split you in half, and somehow you survived, why do I want you to succeed? Why do your objectives matter to me? Why do I care that you succeed and pull this off? So, and that's where we're at. That's where we're at. I think we're more interested in characters that we can relate to. I think modern television today is no longer asking us to admire its heroes. It's not. It's knights in shining armor. I think it's asking us to try and understand villains rather than just compartmentalize them as purely evil constructs of society. We're asked to kind of understand them. And I felt that way a little bit about watching The Dark Knight, Heath Ledger's Joker. I felt, the psychology behind that was just fascinating to me. And in some ways, you almost root for the Joker. It's kind of creepy. But I'll tell you something a little bit about some of these other characters. Now I think that a lot of these characters, this trend to depict morally great characters, and even in the late 90s, there was a TV show called The Shield. Do you remember this? It had Michael Chiklis in it. And he played the leader of some police detectives. And they were like dirty cops. They certainly bent the law. They bent the law. They were kind of dirty cops. And it starred a younger Walton Goggins, who's now a big star on The White Lotus. And he's on everything now. But this was like Walton Goggins' first major TV role. But Michael Chiklis was the leader of this like police squad, not squad necessarily, but this group of detectives. And these were the guys that would like turn off the body cams, turn off the cameras, leave the interrogation room, turn the camera off. Now let me beat the crap out of this rapist or child molester and let me get the truth out of him. These were people that were like, by any means necessary, we're going to get it. The ends justify the means. And we really kind of champion and rally behind these types of characters. They're infinitely fascinating to us. And we can go back further, much further. We can go back centuries and centuries ago. I can sit in a production of Macbeth, or I can read the play of Macbeth by Shakespeare. And yes, Macbeth is evil. He kills his king. He kills Duncan's children. He kills his best friend. He arranges the murder of his best friend, Banquo. I know that because I played Banquo in a stage production of it. He can do this. And yet, there is some sympathy. If the play's performed correctly, sometimes you can get a good actor handling the material. And all those soliloquies, all those opportunities where the character is speaking directly to us, the audience, or us, the viewer, because that's what a soliloquy is. Soli is alone, loque is to speak. You're speaking alone. And just an interesting fact, if you're in English lit class or anything, anytime a Shakespearean character speaks in soliloquy, they always tell the truth. Always. Just remember that. And that's how it was with Macbeth. He would speak to us. He would tell us what it's like. He was burdened with guilt because of the murders. That didn't make him a more sympathetic man, but we could certainly understand a little bit about what he was going through. Same thing with Iago. To a lesser extent, Hamlet, to maybe a lesser extent, King Lear, as his circumstances began to change his outlook and his attitude, we could begin to understand a little bit better. But even with Richard III, you might not remember this. Right before Richard III has his brother Clarence killed by 2 assassins, they actually drowned him in a butt of Malmsey wine, upside down. They drowned him while he was imprisoned. These 2 assassins have a brief dialogue before they commit the murder, where they're gripped with doubt. They're really concerned about the eternal consequences of their actions if they do this murder. I thought that was fascinating. That made the scene so much more interesting. The complexity of these murderers. Shakespeare wasn't interested as well with cookie cutter characters, archetypes that only depict one facet of their characters. He was interested in giving us complex, multifaceted characters, people that lived like we do in a world where there is good and evil influences all around us, where if you give into this impulse, you could become a bad guy, or if you give into that impulse, you could remain a good guy. Shakespeare gave us that centuries ago. And, I don't know. I think the great, the Enlightenment, the religious movement in America, I think Puritan effect on morality, and I think Judeo-Christian principles have really tried to push, right overcomes wrong. The right, the good will triumph. I get that. I think that's why Lord of the Rings was so popular with the fantasy reading crowd, and why it succeeded so universally as a trilogy of films in the early 2000s, because we were coming out of 9/11, and suddenly we have these wonderful films that felt very healing because it was giving us very clear distinctions of good and evil. And even though there was a challenge, the good was triumphing, and that gave us hope. It really did. There was a real sense of justice, like right had prevailed over wrong at the end of those Lord of the Rings films. And that was happening against the backdrop of our nation's worst tragedy, and war, and so much turmoil and strife. And here we are seeing, good triumphing for the sake of good. And that was actually inspiring. But I think, other than that, that might be the last great television or the last great cinema franchise that actually went there and actually tried to tell us that the good is valuable and the good, it deserves to triumph. Back down to where we are, we look at characters today and we see ourselves in these anti-heroes. We do. We see ourselves. There's an MMA fighter, Cain Velasquez. Okay, Cain Velasquez. I'm not an expert on MMA, but I know who Cain Velasquez is. I've watched enough MMA that I'm not completely ignorant of the sport. But Cain Velasquez is a former UFC heavyweight champion, and I think it was his nephew or his niece was allegedly molested by a family friend, and Cain Velasquez chased after this guy in his truck and tried to kill him, and did go to jail. And was released, but he's become a darling. He's become a hero, and that cuts across political lines. Right, left, doesn't matter, because anyone who's a father of children or loves children within their family and believes that they should be protected at all costs, woe betide anybody that goes after kids. I have no sympathy for the full extent of the law to land on you. And if in the absence of the full extent of the law, there's a big part of me that still hopes for, I'd be okay with vigilante justice. If the law failed to do its duty for lack of evidence or, I don't know, money, but vigilante justice happened, and that was justice, awesome. And I could get into a big thing about the Epstein files. I'm not going to do that. But I want to stick with just these moral characters in television. And I'm thinking that socially, we were being introduced to characters who could bend the rules, break some laws, operate outside the lines, as it were, in terms of society, because the ends justified the means. And I think that's what's going on right now in politics. It's not that I think politics influenced this trend in media to give us morally gray characters. It's that I think that consciously, I think a lot of people in American society, in our culture today, were ready to accept, rationalize, excuse, overlook morally questionable judgment calls, morally questionable things. But I think how we got there is I think we began to become interested in morally gray characters. And I even feel the same way about Andor. There are characters in the Disney Star Wars show Andor, the first 2 seasons, that did morally questionable things. But it was okay because the ends justified the means. The same people that stick up for Malcolm X, people that embrace Malcolm X's ideology over, Martin Luther King's ideology. The ends justify the means. We make these morally rational arguments and excuses for people if it gets us what we want. There are some people that want the country to be a certain way. So they're not interested how the sausage is made as long as it comes out and it tastes good. If that makes sense. But there are so many examples in the current landscape of TV, but it goes back longer than 25 years, late 90s, at the turn of the last century, at the turn of the 21st century, we were finally being given characters that centuries ago fascinated audiences. And you can even go back even further to Greek times, like, the plays of Sophocles, and you can go all the way back to ancient Greece, and you can see plays like Antigone or Oedipus or whatever it may be. There are characters that are they have one foot in 2 different worlds, good and evil. And even the Bible has examples of people like this, King Solomon, King David, especially King David, they did bad things, they did good things, and we have to admit that sometimes in a Judeo-Christian mindset, the God of Abraham and Isaac will work with imperfect people. It's all he has to work with. And so there's that rationalization too. But anyway, I just wanted to let you know that I think the trend to show us these kind of morally complex characters, it continues, and it's endlessly fascinating. But I think it hasn't been necessarily good. Is that fair to say? Fascinating, yes. But its influence on society, hard to quantify. It's much harder to make that case. I'm not a sociologist, I'm not a psychologist, but I actually think that the world is a little bit more morally ambivalent in the United States than it used to be. And that goes for both sides of the political spectrum. The things that we'll tolerate, the things that we'll put up with to get what we want, the rationalization is worrying. So for you, if you're a parent, and I am, I hope that you are teaching your kids correct principles. I hope you're teaching them clearly demarcated lines between good and evil. I hope that you're not providing examples of them to say one thing and do another. Okay? So anyway, enough with the morality lesson. I just wanted to share that with you. There's some wonderful TV shows out there that are just so good. I mean, even the character of Wilson Fisk in the villain in the Daredevil show is clearly representing, in my opinion, and maybe it's because I have my MAGA lens on and I see everything with this kind of negative MAGA bent, but I'm looking at the character of Wilson Fisk, played by Vincent D'Onofrio, who's doing excellent in that role, by the way. And it's very Trump-like. I don't know what came first, Trump's political career or the comic book backstory, but it's very Trump-like. Even more on the nose, and they've admitted this, is Eric Kripke's The Boys for Amazon, the character of Homelander. He is very much Trump-like, and they're having lots of fun. Even the creator of The Boys TV show for Amazon has said there's been some things that we've had to discard because Trump did them first before we could make fun of it, because we're almost on the same wavelength. So they're trying they're trying to provide audiences with parody, but unfortunately, it's not going to land as potently as they wanted it to, because it's already actually happening. So anyway, for everyone else out there, that's the podcast today. Some great shows. Maul, the Shadow Lord, is a fantastic show. If you're a Gen Xer like me, you grew up on Star Wars, you spent your whole childhood wishing there'd be a TV series, and there never was, except the Star Wars Christmas special, which was so awful. It invites ridicule and totally deserves it. But the only thing we got was some sequels, and then eventually they re-released them in the theaters. Now is a great time to be a Star Wars fan. You've got so many great shows on Disney Plus. Maul, Shadow Lord is fantastic. If you're a Marvel comic book fan, the first 2 seasons are out of Daredevil on Disney Plus. They're brilliant. Daredevil Born Again, very good. We're going to get, speaking of morally gray characters that are anti-heroes and kind of draw outside the lines, we're going to get the Punisher on Disney Plus. So we're going to get Frank Castle, Vigilante Justice, and that's another character this stuff isn't happening in a vacuum, people. That all of these characters are becoming popular, and we're seeing more and more shows about characters that do morally questionable things. It's not happening in a vacuum. We're seeing these characters because there's something about them that we can relate to. And I think that is the key. I think what makes characters like Homelander and Wilson Fisk terrifying is because they feel familiar. So there's that too. Anyway, enough out of me. I hope you're having a great week. I hope you're taking very good care of yourself. For all you moms out there, if you're a mother listening to this, happy Mother's Day. My wife has been fantastic. She's been the silent supporter of this podcast for the last 4 years. I really can't say thank you enough to her. She's just in every way my superior, in every way, intellectually, morally, spiritually, physically, my superior in every way. And as a parent, the bar is too high. It's just too high, but I'll do my best to try and jump and grab it. So she's been a fantastic mom to our 3 kids, and I can't say thank you enough. So for all you moms out there, happy Mother's Day, even though you're listening to this at least by Tuesday of the following week. But I'll see you out there. I hope you're taking good care of yourself. Love who you are, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.